Happy Passion Week.
Happy Passion Week.
Yeah, this is exciting times right here at the beginning of Easter, Monday, Thursday, Good Friday, um, and all that stuff. So I'm sure you've hidden all the eggs very carefully.
Absolutely.
But yeah, so I'm really excited. I want to talk about some of the fulfilled prophecies uh, of Christ during Passion Week. There are so many and so many connections to the Old Testament that I just really never could have expected. I was just, I don't know. Like I had made some of the connections. Everyone kind of grows up with a few prophecies that are like, oh yeah, this is the deal. But there were so many more that I never really saw before. And even one in particular that my wife really, I don't know, brought on, and it was kind of a palm slapper, face slapper. I was like, oh my gosh, where did I miss that one from? So I hope, do you have like favorite ones?
Uh, yeah. Like Zechariah 12:10 is probably my favorite, just because
Really?
it's one of those ones that's it's kind of hard if someone denies that Jesus is God. It's hard to make that prophecy make sense because it's Yahweh is the subject. Yahweh is the one that it's about, and it's talking about they will look upon him whom they have pierced. And well,
Hmm.
and that's obviously Jesus. And so, like, yeah, I just don't know um, a good way to make that work if if someone denies that he is God, that he is Yahweh.
Yeah. No, that's certainly a really powerful one. And especially when I combine that with Psalm 22
Hmm.
and Isaiah 53, like the combination of those three to me read in conjunction is
Yep.
really, really potent.
Yep.
So now I'll tell you the first one that got me. And it was funny actually. Actually, it was this time la- last year. I actually was preaching the week before Easter. I got to preach the 2 weeks prior up to Easter at a church. And I was kind of drawing and making some of the connections. But one of the ones was Jesus riding on a donkey. You remember when Jesus rides into the city on a donkey? And my wife is like, yeah, that's from Solomon. Solomon rides into Jerusalem on a donkey
Hmm.
as his kingly procession. And it's
Yeah.
like, that's exactly what Jesus is doing. He's riding in as the kingly procession. And Solomon was the type, the typology, you could say,
Hmm.
of what? He's the son of David.
Yep.
He's the son of David who is to ride in as king. And that's what Jesus represents, right? The son of David who rides into the city as kind of the beginning of his inauguration, his kingly march into the city.
Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah, because Solomon he fulfilled Second Samuel, I believe it's like 7:10 to 20, somewhere around there. Like y- y- so he fulfilled that prophecy. Solomon did, but it like if we were to believe that that prophecy was about Solomon and Solomon alone, it'd be kind of a disappointing prophecy. Um, so Jesus, he's the full fulfillment of it. And there's these kinds of examples all throughout the Old Testament where a prophet will tell a prophecy and it will be fulfilled usually within the lifetime of the prophet or the people he's speaking to, but it has a future, a far off future fulfillment also. So, Second Samuel 7, it was fulfilled in Solomon in the short term, but in the long term, the fullness of that prophecy has been fulfilled in Christ. Fulfill it to the the fullness of it in the new heavens, new earth.
Yeah. No, it's true. Like there's kind of these aspects to where you kind of have this completion, you could say, of a
Mhm.
prophecy where it's kind of almost a shadow of what's to come in the beginning.
Yeah, that's pretty cool how the
Now,
Bible does
I was
that.
yeah, yeah. Well, in like actually makes the Bible to me easier to understand when you see it. It's like, oh yeah, this theme, it's here and here and here and here. It's not only in one place, and that these stories are all connected. It's telling one consistent story.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, it's hard enough to get one prophecy correct, but when you're, like, making prophecies that have more than one fulfillment, like, and this is a reoccurring thing, like, it's hard to fake that. It's hard to fake unless it's super vague, like, King David will have a son and he will be king. Oh, so the son of the king will be king. Wow, that's some prophecy, you know. But
Yeah,
like it was second Samuel was very specific. He'll have a peaceful reign, Israel will have peace. And during Solomon's reign, it was Israel was peaceful. And also in that prophecy, it says he will build me I believe it's in that prophecy. It says he'll build me a temple. And so, so Jesus will fulfill that in the fullness in the new heavens, new earth. But it'll be
yeah.
not a temple made by hands, but it will be the presence of God Himself.
All right, so I want to get right to kind of some of this Passion Week narrative and everything like that. And so after you have Christ's kind of triumphal entry, which they're all shouting, Hosanna, Hosanna in the highest. And then Jesus kind of has, goes up to the upper room and they're there to celebrate Passover, right? And understanding Passover to me has been one of the hugest deals in getting what was all going on for the Lord's Supper. And there are so many really good connections. Now, the first one is that actually I've heard people want to connect the Lord's Supper with Isaiah 53, right? And saying, like, look, this is the beginning of kind of the reference to Christ being also a servant, right? And that he's going to be the suffering servant
Yeah,
that is going to endure all of the tragedies that are going forward.
yeah. Um, are you want me to go into like what I was saying about Hebrews 13 or
Yeah, we can start there. Let's start there. Well, I guess maybe I'll mention a couple things
okay?
from what I see, and then you can go into further detail. But we do communion fairly often, or at least I'll say on a regular basis. Some people do it every week, some people do it once a month, and it's still kind of amazing to me. Everybody does communion, but I will just say, especially growing up, I didn't really understand why we were doing communion. Like, you could bring me back to the story, and I feel like that's where most people go. It's like, well, Jesus did communion, and he told us this is his blood and this is his body. Yeah, that's true. Why do we do communion though? I don't like it doesn't really go any further than that for me.
Yeah,
And that was one of the things is just that I didn't really understand a more full grasp of what this was supposed to mean and why it was supposed to be significant. Uh, Now, the one thing that I want to mention, well, two things I'll mention. Number one is that when Jesus is born, right? He's born from Bethlehem, right? Which means basically house of bread, right? Beth meaning house and lechem meaning bread. And the first place that bread is ever mentioned is Genesis 3:19. And that's talking about Adam and kind of the curse of the ground, and that for Adam, right, by the sweat of his brow, he will eat bread. And that's kind of just to say that, hey, like you're going to kind of eat in futility. And so under Adam, You're going to eat bread, but it will never be satisfying. It will never fulfill you. And so I always just found that to be profound, just connecting it back to Genesis 3 and going like, oh yeah, like God was saying, under Adam, you will never be fulfilled,
Yeah.
but I have a greater fulfillment for you. So now before you kick off, let's welcome our other good pal here, the annoying apologist against Catholics. Oh, I'm sorry, Nathan. I didn't mean to.
That's me. How you guys doing tonight, man?
Doing good. Good to see you.
Yeah, you too. What I miss? I just kind of tuned in a couple minutes ago.
Yeah, not too much, man. Not too much. Just talked a little bit about the procession and how Christ's walk into the city was kind of the fulfillment and image of Solomon. That Solomon is the first one to walk, march into Jerusalem on a donkey, and he comes as the son of David, and so Jesus does too.
Yeah, absolutely. And I know we're talking about fulfilled prophecy for Jesus, and so I think this is going to be a really fun stream as we're, heading up towards Easter and all that. And we're in Holy Week, so this is a wonderful thing to meditate on.
Yeah. So Steve has got some new stuff to share, which was new to him and new to me. So if it's not new to you, good for you. But yeah. So yeah, why don't you go ahead and dive in, Steve?
All right. So, I've been really trying hard to understand Hebrews 13:7-16 for the past 3 months or so, 2 or 3 months. And I felt like, it had something to do with priestly roles, and had a tying in with Leviticus and the sacrifices. But I was just I was really struggling to understand what was being said there, and I knew that it couldn't properly be understood without having a firm grasp of Leviticus and the whole Levitical priesthood and the sacrifices. And so I just kind of went through and was learned about all the different sacrifices and what they mean, and the rituals that they went through. And so as I was reading um Leviticus, I was seeing how, like, oh well, this kind of ties into Hebrews 13. Well, this one also kind of does. And so I was trying to see, like, well, which one really fit the most. And I I'll have to walk you through the text to kind of get you to understand my thought process here. But I think ultimately, and this is all speculation at this point. Like, I haven't really thoroughly vetted this, like, so take it with a grain of salt. But as far as I can tell, like, this is a pretty good understanding of the text. Okay, so it starts off, this is Hebrews 13:7. Remember your leaders, those who spoke to you the word of God. Consider the outcome of their way of life and imitate their faith. So right off the bat, when I hear outcome of their way of life, I think of, they have already died. Like, when you think of someone, the outcome of their life, you don't really think of someone who's currently alive. And so right off the bat, I believe he's could be, and probably talking about martyrs, people who, we need to imitate their life, their faith. They were faithful unto death. Now, whether they were martyred or whether they just passed, under natural causes, either way, we need to imitate their way of life, that they were faithful unto death. So that's ultimately the message, I believe verse 7 is getting at, is, imitate their faithfulness unto death. Like, finish the course, finish the race. Jesus Christ is the same yesterday, today, and forever. So this is, we can trust in him. Like, he's not going to change. He's faithful. He's always going to be faithful. Do not be led away by diverse and strange teachings, for it is good for the heart to be strengthened by grace, not by foods which have not benefited those devoted to them. We have an altar from which those who serve the tent have no right to eat. Okay, so what I believe verses 9 and 10 are referring to are the Levitical priesthood and the foods that they offer for offerings. And up until Jesus, they were pleasing to God, but now they're within the context of Jesus now being the fulfillment of the law and the prophets. Now, priestly offerings in the tabernacle were actually not pleasing to God, and it's it says which have not benefited those devoted to them. And so if we, this is talking about those in Christ, believers, if we have an altar from which those who serve the tent have no right to eat, so that if that's the case, only priests can eat from the tent, from the holy place, and that's I believe this is referring to the bread of the presence, the showbread. Only priests can eat the showbread. And so I believe what the writer of Hebrews is trying to do is saying, and I believe this is consistent throughout Hebrews, is that the old Levitical priesthood has done away, and Christ has replaced it. He's now our high priest, and like Aaron is a typology of Christ, and then we're a typology of the sons of Aaron. So we're the new priesthood under Christ. He's our high priest, and now we're a royal priesthood, as Peter puts it. And Jesus himself calls us priests, I believe, in Revelation 1:5. So we have
And hey,
this
Steve,
idea. Yeah.
not to get off on anything, but I just wanted to make sure that everyone else understood the bread of the presence, because it's so funny, because I actually just read this in Exodus this morning too.
Nice.
And it's right there talking about, as they're setting up the temple, they're setting up the Ark of the Covenant, there is this bread that they're supposed to have in there, right? It's right there in the temple, and it's called the bread of the presence, or one of the other translations is the bread of the face. And I think the obvious implication, right? The obvious point, right, is that it's kind of the bread of the Lord, or the face of the Lord, the bread of the face of the Lord. And I just think that's such powerful imagery, as you have Jesus here, and he's like, hey, this is my body. And what is he referring to? He's like, oh yeah. Well, the bread is to represent the presence of the Lord. And he's like, this is me.
Yeah, exactly. Okay. So here's the issue. If we're priests, we in Levitical law, to become a priest, you have to have the ordination offering, and the ordination offering, if I remember correctly, is 2 rams and a bull. And so the first ram is burnt completely on the altar. The second ram, it's we eat the flesh of the lamb. So that, this is my flesh, so like in this all type, let me see here. Like, I have so many notes on this, it's hard to it's hard to figure out what all to say here. Okay, so like, let's see.
So
you got 1 young
the other
bull
thing,
and 2
okay,
rams.
yeah,
And unleavened bread, and wine. Okay, so again, so that's why I believe is actually being described here in Hebrews 13 is the ordination offering. And so the way that he words things, it's often speculated that Hebrews is kind of ends abruptly, like it's as if he was, not really being concerned about space up until like the last chapter, like towards the end of the papyri or whatever it was. And it's like he kind of like, oh man, I'm running out of room, and so he just kind of quickly made some points, but he wasn't as thorough as he was throughout the rest of the book. And so I believe that's what's going on here. Like, he's expecting his audience to already have a thorough understanding of the priesthood and what's required of it, and of sacrifices and all the entailments that come with sacrifices. And unfortunately, those of us today, like, that's why when we read this stuff, we're like, what's he talking about? Like, what exactly is going on here? But yeah, like,
For
so
those of us that didn't grow up with sacrifices,
right.
we're like, I don't really get it.
Yeah, so like, if he's trying to contrast the, those who serve the tent, and that was a way of describing the Levitical priesthood. So he's saying, he's contrasting them with us, because only the priesthood, only a legitimate priesthood could eat of the bread of presence. And so that's, this priesthood is no longer legitimate. The priesthood that has Jesus Christ as our high priest, that's the legitimate priesthood. And so again, if we're a priesthood, we have to be ordained. There has to be an ordination offering. And so I believe Jesus represents all those animals, because even in I think Hebrews 13, it talks about the animals. So like, it's it's plural. So I mean, I do believe it's more than one animal. And then also in Hebrews, I believe 7:13-14, it compares Jesus, or likens Jesus to the red heifer sacrifice. And that's a whole nother thing. But yeah, so the ordination sacrifice, it's one young bull, 2 rams, and unleavened bread. Okay, so let's go back to Hebrews 7 or 13. For the bodies of those animals whose blood is brought into the holy places by the high priest as a sacrifice for sin are burned outside the camp. Okay, so that's the outcome. Like, so the emphasis so far seems to be the outcome. So through after the whole ritual, after the whole ordination ritual, the outcome is you take all the animals, and you burn them in the clean place, or the place of ashes, outside the camp. And then it says, so Jesus also suffered outside the gate. Now, so and that's also the entrance. And so now he's going back to, before the ceremony itself, and saying, this is what happened. Jesus is like these animals that were sacrificed for the ordination. And then it says, so therefore let us go to him outside the camp and bear the reproach he endured. So outside the camp, again, that's the outcome. So to tie it back in with 7, let the outcome of our faith, let us be faithful unto death. And by being faithful unto death, that's when we join Christ in the place of ashes, the place that has been made clean. So I believe it's symbolic for that. And then the next verse is, for here we have no lasting city, but we seek the city that is to come. So the idea is, we'll be faithful unto death, even if that means martyrdom, but our home is not here. Our home is in heaven. It's in the heavenly Jerusalem. And that, when Jesus returns, his kingdom, as he prayed to the Father, your kingdom come, your will be done. And, as he told his disciples in the parable of the sheep and the goats, that the sheep will inherit his kingdom that he has prepared for them when after Judgment Day, after he returns with his angels. Then the next verse is, through him, then, let us continually offer up a sacrifice of praise to God, that is the fruit of lips that acknowledge his name. So the praise offering is usually wine. And let me see here if I have some on the praise offering. So the praise sacrifice, also known as the thank offering or a peace offering, during the days of the tabernacle was a voluntary offering presented to God to express gratitude, devotion, or fulfillment of a vow. It was one of the key types of sacrifices outlined in the Hebrew Bible, particularly in Leviticus 3 and Leviticus 7:11-36. Here are its key features. The the praise. The praise sacrifice was offered to give thanks for blessings, deliverance, or specific answered prayers. It was distinct from the sin or burnt offerings as it focused on communion with God and a celebration rather than atonement for sin. So the praise offering is this idea of communion, and so the writer of Hebrews is going from, so this is the outcome of our life. Eventually we need to be faithful unto death as those before us, and who followed Christ in the same way that he was faithful unto death. But in the meantime, we need to give praise offerings, and praise offerings are very similar to communion. It's this idea of us gathering together for a meal, because during the praise offering, people would get with, like, a family would join a priest in the area of the altar, the holy place, and they would essentially have a meal, and so they'd break, and it would be unleavened bread and wine, and so they would eat the flesh. So I mean, if usually these a praise offering would be included with like a sin offering or a burnt offering. So you're eating the flesh, you're drinking the wine, and it's all this idea of community with God and community, or in community with each other. And so I believe that's what communion is all about. It's about us, becoming in one mind and one spirit with God and with each other. It's coming into union with God, coming into union with each other. And so, yeah, like, that's what I believe Hebrews 13 is really trying to get at. And one of the things about that's kind of strange about Hebrews is there's never ever a mention of communion, but it's here. It's actually here in the praise offering, and especially when you think about us being part of the sacrifice, of the ordination offering. But yeah.
Well, and I think it's really cool because this also reminds me exactly of Exodus 24, right? So they're on Mount Sinai, Moses, Aaron, Nadab, Abihu, and then the 70 elders, they all go up, and it says, and they saw the God of Israel. There was under his feet, as it were, a pavement of sapphire stone, like the very heaven for clearness. And he did not lay his hand on the chief men of the people of Israel. They beheld God and ate and drank. And so here's the people of Israel eating and drinking with God, on Mount Sinai. And that's exactly what I think of when I think of communion.
Yeah.
It's this idea of them sitting down with God and eating and drinking and, yeah, having fellowship. And I think that's part of the big picture, is that God wants to have a relationship with you. He wants to have fellowship with you. And that's one of the big ways of getting together, is around a meal.
Yeah.
Also, why it was a big deal, when Paul is like, yeah, don't even eat with such people. When he's talking about, like, the sinners or the hypocrites, he's like, yeah, look, we don't associate with them. And that means not eating with them. What do you think, Nathan?
So I'm just enjoying listening to this. Honestly, I had a few of different kinds of prophecies I was thinking through, like
Sure.
when I came into it. So I was like, I'm just listening to what you guys have prepared. I'm enjoying this a lot. I'm also taking some notes. I have like a Word doc over here open, so I'm gonna go look at some of this stuff later. But yeah, whenever you guys are through sharing through some of that, I've got a couple of cool prophecies as well, but they're totally unrelated to this, so I don't want to shake
All
up
right.
what's talking about right now. But right now, you guys are doing great. I'm good to sit here for a minute.
Yeah. So the one other one I want to sort of touch on, of course, is just that it's Passover, right? That
Mhm.
this is Passover, and that there's lots and lots of layers to the Passover stuff, right? And the evening here where Christ is there with his apostles, pouring out, the cup and the bread, reminds me a lot of Passover week. And Passover was what the story that everybody would be telling in Israel at this time. Everybody's going to be talking about their tremendous exit from Egypt and how God liberated them from Egypt through the Passover as they spread the blood of the lamb over the doorposts. And then the people eventually left Egypt. Now, when God did that, he told them to prepare a meal in advance and to eat, because he knew as soon as this was going to happen to Pharaoh, Pharaoh was like, all right, guys, get out. And God's basically like, yes, pick up your stuff and leave immediately. And so I think about this a little bit almost as in preparation, like the bread was meant to sustain them. Jesus' blood is the blood of the new covenant and protects them, sort of. But in this case, yeah, it is more talking about these other ideas of communion. But part of the main point is Jesus being the bread of life, also the manna from heaven. He's the bread from heaven come down to meet with us. I think that there's a lot of depth in there for all those aspects. Well, we have also the man, the myth, the legend, Brian.
Hi, how are you?
I'm doing good, man. Doing good.
Well, great. Well, how are you gentlemen doing?
Doing good.
Doing good. Doing well.
Wonderful.
Nice to meet you.
Beautiful. Glad to be here. I could probably only stay for about an hour or so, but I was looking forward to this all day. I said, man, I know this is going to be a great discussion. I said, he's got people on his channel all the time that, wow, you just think that they've been to seminary for 20 years with all they know. It's just amazing. It's like belting out $100 answers with, every 2 seconds. But it's great to meet you guys. Great to meet you guys.
You too.
Hey, you too. Thank you.
Yeah. So, Brian, we were just talking about the Lord's table and kind of connecting that with some of the Old Testament passages. One, I love to connect it with Exodus 24, where it's talking about, the Lord meets with them on the mountain and has a meal with them. They were sitting there with God, eating a meal. And Steve was really just explaining and connecting this with Hebrews 13. And it's talking a bunch about there was actually, a wine and bread offering. And that this is basically representing, the bread of the presence of the Lord. And in Exodus as well, that's where it's talking about when they're setting up the temple, you had this bread of the presence of the Lord and everything. So I didn't know if you had any particular prophecies that stood out to you the most, Brian. We've got a bunch, and we might just have to go a little bit back and forth. I don't know if we'll just totally go chronologically for everything, but yeah, glad you could be here.
Yeah, well, it's a pleasure. I couldn't really figure out what it was though that you wanted to talk about. Was it just the Old Testament prophecies in particular, or was it, because I know the cross. I know you said, well, the cross. I'm thinking, well, the cross. I'm trying to think of passages that were fulfilled solely by the cross. I'm thinking, he's got to mean the cross and the resurrection. Bundling them together. I mean, there's a lot of passages that were fulfilled, yeah. I think, with Christ's death and resurrection. I'm trying to think of anything specific that was fulfilled with the cross. The only thing I could think of was, off the top of my head, was Leviticus chapter 16. The slaying of the sin offering. And I said, well, then he went into the temple, and I think he came out again. I think he offered one for himself and his family, and he came out again. Then he went back in. But I said, he's in the temple. He's in the holy place right now. So he hasn't come out yet. So I said, that's got kind of off limits. I don't think he wants to go there. And then I thought, well, anyways, it's been a long day for me. But I think that, did you say that you believe that all Old Testament prophecy was fulfilled on the cross? Because I think I might have misunderstood you when you said that. So I didn't want to, I didn't want to step on your toes or anything, but is that what you said?
No, I'm definitely not really gonna say that. No.
Okay,
No,
okay.
I
'Cause I
was
was
just
gonna say
really
that's gonna be tough. I would say you might get some friendly pushback
no,
on
no, no.
that. I don't know. I don't
Well,
know if
I'll make
anybody
some
would.
new preterist friends after that, though.
Yeah, oh yeah. Well, it would be better, probably better to say that they were fulfilled on the cross than AD 70. But yeah, I mean, the only one that I could think of really, the main prophecy that stuck out to me was Micah chapter 4, where it says, in the last days, the mountain of, I'd have to look at it. It's see, I think I had it. I indexed it. It said, it shall come to pass in the latter days that the mountain of the house of the Lord shall be established as the highest of the mountains, and shall be raised up above the hills, and peoples. So that's not that's Amim, shall flow to it, and many nations shall come and say, come, let us go up to the mountain of the Lord, to the house of the God of Jacob, that he may teach us his ways, and we will walk in his paths. For out of Zion shall go forth the law and the word of the Lord from Jerusalem. So his law is going forth to all the nations. And that was, to me, the thing that, during this season when we're celebrating the death and resurrection of Christ, we have to think, well, he gave a law, just like Moses, where it said, I think in Hebrews chapter 9, it said, well, Moses had spoken all the words to the people. He then sacrifices, sprinkled the book and all the people with the blood, saying, this is the blood of the covenant that God has made with you. I was thinking, well, Jesus Christ, he spoke all his words to the people, and then he sealed the new covenant with his own blood. And then it said later on, it said, we're sprinkled with his blood. So we're sprinkled with his blood, and we're under the new covenant. So it's got to be, it's like an analogy between the law of Moses and the law of Christ. The law of Moses will condemn, the law of Christ delivers. And so I think that this is the only passage I really had for you tonight, was Micah, where it says that, and I understand that this can be given a futuristic interpretation as well. And I said, okay, that's fine, but there's a sense in which it can also be applied to this present period post-ascension, where Jesus Christ, where the law is now going forth, and all men are to walk in Christ's law. And he said he's going to judge everyone by the words of his mouth when he returns. So I said, well, this is too easy, and I like to have a passage that's easy. But what do you guys think?
Yeah, well, and I actually think that it reminds me of just the idea that the knowledge of the Lord will fill the earth. Is that the knowledge of Yahweh will fill the earth, and that's kind of the promise of God. And as God's knowledge fills the earth, and I think actually there's a whole lot more there that actually connect exactly with that idea. But yeah, and let's have maybe we'll do this a little bit more. Maybe we'll have Nathan share some of his, and like I said, they don't have to be completely in order, and I've got plenty more left to share. But yeah, I was really just looking at all of the prophecies from Christ's triumphal entry through his resurrection. So,
and interesting. I was going to the ones that I had were specifically just about what Christ himself accomplished. So I didn't have anything specifically for the Holy Week, but I can get you some because I have some of those as well. But one that I had prepared, just been thinking about a little bit, is the contrast between Pentecost and the Tower of Babel. Because the Tower of Babel, man came together and they said, let's build for ourselves a city and let's build it up high. And it says they had unified language and they were all working together. And then what does God do? Yahweh scatters them and confuses their languages, right? But then at Pentecost, what happens? Instead of man building up, God comes down with his spirit, and then their language again is unified. They speak in tongues and they can understand one another again. And so one thing I see in Jesus is that because he says I have to go so that I can send the Spirit. And so I think that this is something Jesus accomplished with going to the cross. I guess I could tie it in that way, is that he could then send the Spirit of God down and kind of have that contrast with the Tower of Babel. And that's one I've kind of been thinking about this week. So I wonder if you guys have any thoughts on that.
Well, just in the sense that like we had actually talked about, to me, this was a conclusion I came to resolve. So going with sort of connecting all of these
Yeah.
temple imagery, right?
Yeah.
And the big question for me that I really had was, Jesus says, if I do not go up to heaven, he says, hey, don't hold on to me, woman, for I have not yet ascended to the heavens, right? I've not yet ascended to the right hand of God. And he says, if I don't go, then the comforter won't come. The Holy Spirit won't come. And I was just wondering, I was like, why? Like, why not? Like, it doesn't, it's like, okay, cool. Like, if you just tell me, like, this is what's going to happen, but he phrases it and says, like, he will not come if I do not go. And I was like, there has to be a reason for that. And this is what I believe what the reason was that he goes up as the sacrifice, and then he becomes our high priest, stands in the real temple in the heavens, sprinkling his blood on the mercy seat, cleansing it and purifying it so that we can become the temple of God. And so as a result, we are clean in every sense. Our sins are cleansed away. We are purified by his blood so that we can become the temple of God. Therefore, the presence of the Lord can come and dwell and live inside of us. And that was part of the big point behind Pentecost, was that now that Christ is our high priest who stands in the holy temple in the heavens, because that which was on earth was just a shadow of that which represented in heaven, we can therefore be cleansed, and the Holy Spirit can come and fill us and dwell inside of us. And that's what good old Leonard Ravenhill used to say, was he's like, you know what, the most amazing thing in the Bible, is that God comes to live inside of us. He says, I don't know of any other religion where God comes to dwell inside of man.
And this is a complete contrast with the ancient world, right? In the ancient world, there were earthly locations to go worship each god. Like if you wanted to go worship El or Baal or Yahweh, you went to the specific temple grounds of that specific god and you would worship there. And this is why I love the woman at the well, the story in John chapter 4 so much, is because for those that don't know the historical context of that story, the Samaritans, they were like a different sect where they thought they were the real Jewish people, right? They thought they were the ones that had the real law and the real Torah, and they had like their own versions of the different books of the Bible where they would say, no, it's not Mount Sinai, it's this mountain that we have over here. And they would actually rewrite the scriptures. And so around the time, like maybe 100, 150 years before Jesus had come, the Jews had actually destroyed the Samaritan temple. And so the Samaritans had nowhere to worship. And so this is actually a very personal question for her when she's talking to Jesus about the temple. She's like, because the Samaritans had literally nowhere to go to worship their God, and they were considered unclean, kind of like a leper. They were not allowed to go into the temple to worship Yahweh. And so Jesus, he tells her, there's a time now that is here now and will come that my real worshipers will worship in spirit and in truth. In other words, we are the temple, like you were just talking about. There is no earthly temple we have to go to. There's no geographical location where I have to go in order to worship Yahweh. We can worship him everywhere. And this kind of goes back to what you were just talking about a moment ago, Adam, where you said that the knowledge of Yahweh will spread to the whole earth. And I actually think that's my favorite prophecy about Jesus is Psalm 22, which is a psalm about the crucifixion. Towards the end of it, I think it's verse 27, if I'm remembering off the top of my head, it says, all the nations will remember what my suffering servant did. So like this servant that's going and being crucified and surrounded and being mocked and all these things, they're going to look at that and all the nations of the world will worship Yahweh. And to me, the reason I think this is such a cool prophecy is because I think it's skeptic proof as well. The skeptics, they want to say, oh, well, a lot of the prophecies Jesus fulfilled in the Gospels, the authors just kind of made up those details in order to fit all the prophecies of the Old Testament. But to me, this is one where it's like, you can't say that, because they said in the Old Testament, nations all over the world would worship Yahweh because of a guy being like mocked and all this stuff. And here we are today with Jesus being the only man alive who's ever fulfilled that prophecy. So that's another reason I love that prophecy. It's skeptic proof, but it's also just a wonderful testament to the God that we serve, that, as Romans 9 teaches, it's not about your lineage. It's not about being Jewish ethnically or of blood. It's about, God wants all people to be in this new covenant. So I'll let someone else comment.
Did you have another one you wanted to share, Stephen? You're on mute. You're still on mute, Stephen.
Sorry about that. Well, I mean, you've kind of mentioned it a little bit, but Zechariah 9:9, when Jesus enters into Jerusalem on Palm Sunday. Actually, I want to take a step back, and I want to talk about what I was talking about to you before we came on stream. Okay, so I don't know if anybody has watched the Bible Project's video on John, but in part 2, they do a phenomenal job of kind of portraying the gospel through Lazarus, like the way that Jesus responded to hearing about Lazarus being killed, and so Jesus had fled from Jerusalem because they were seeking to kill him, and then he got word that Lazarus had died, and that's when Jesus wept. Like, Jesus was distraught that Lazarus had died, and but he decided that he was going to go to him. He was going to go to Lazarus to raise him from the dead, even though he knew it meant certain death. He knew, because Lazarus was in Jerusalem, he knew that if he entered Jerusalem, he would die. And so he went there anyway. And so when he went there, he fulfilled Palm Sunday, Zechariah 9:9. And so I just love it, because it's just this picture of, how much Jesus loved Lazarus is how much he loves each and every one of us. You know, Jesus did not have to go to Jerusalem. He didn't, he didn't have to raise Lazarus from the dead. He was driven by love, by, desiring Lazarus to live. And that's the picture of Jesus in heaven. Like, he wanted us to live. He didn't have to come here. He didn't have to Incarnation didn't have to happen. It was a choice. And that's the beauty of it. That's the beauty of the gospel. That's the good news, that God, came in the flesh to reconcile us to himself, so that way we can spend eternity with him. Like, who are we? It's really amazing. Like we, all of us are undeserving of that love, and then once we realize we are the object of that kind of love, it helps us to want to do right by God. Like, you hear atheists or non-Christians sometimes say, why would you serve a God that makes you serve him? Why would you want to serve him for eternity? And it's like, you don't understand. Like when you go to a sports arena and everybody's cheering for the athletes, no one looks around and questions, why are these athletes making these people cheer for them? No one's making anybody cheer for the athletes. People are cheering for the athletes because they enjoy what the athletes are doing. They're impressed by what the athletes have done. But, like, that's the whole point of it. And so, how much greater is what Christ has done for us than what those athletes do? And of course, we're going to cheer, we're going to praise, we're going to love the Lord, we're going to return, with to him in thanksgiving and gratitude. It's hard to put into words exactly, how amazing it truly is.
Yeah, I think so. I think so. Now, one of the other ones I wanted to get to was actually the Mount of Transfiguration. I don't know if this will exactly fit in all the paradigm, but since you're in Zechariah, right? I think of Zechariah 4. And this one maybe isn't as established as some other people, but I really think it's quite compelling. You remember when Jesus goes and he's there at the Mount of Transfiguration, and there's Elijah and Moses, right? There's Elijah and Moses. And what happens is that you've got these two very prominent Old Testament prophets there and leaders. And this reminds me of Zechariah 4, 2 through 3, where first it goes off as like, hey, behold, a lampstand, all of gold, with a bowl on top of it, 7 lamps on it, and with 7 lips on each of the lamps there are on top of it. And there are 2 olive trees by it, one on the right and one on the left. And then you go down to verse 11 and through 14, and he says like, hey, what are these 2 olive trees on the right and the left of the lampstand? And he says, they are the 2 anointed ones who stand by the Lord of all the earth. And that's what I think is going on when you have Elijah and Moses. It's actually calling back to this idea of the 2 ones who will stand on either side of the Lord of all the earth. And this is interesting to me because then it uses the same type of idea in Revelation 11:3, right? Where he says, oh, and I will give authority to my 2 witnesses, and they will prophesy for 1,260 days and clothed in sackcloth. These are the 2 olive trees and the 2 lampstands that stand before the Lord of all the earth. And so I think that that's what it's referencing. It's calling back to the idea that, hey, look, this is the Lord of all the earth. They are the 2 lampstands. They're the 2 ones who stand on either side of the Lord of all the earth. And so again, just reaffirming these claims about who is this that we're looking at? Who is the Messiah that we're looking at? All right, if there's no comments on that one, you can keep going.
I was going to just say, those are some great points that you brought out. And I like, Steve, I liked your analogy of the cheering. Yeah, nobody's making them cheer. And of course, Nathan, I thought you brought out a great point about the body of Christ, the temple. And also about Pentecost. I think there's, for me, the transfiguration is pretty much, those two witnesses are really saying, they're basically saying, well, the law, not only did the law and the prophets bear witness, they're not only bearing witness of Christ, but they're saying, hey, wait a minute, Christ is greater than the law and the prophets. So it's one of those things where everything's leading up to Christ. And there's a lot of people that will say, well, the law of Moses is greater than, what Christ taught. And so the law of Moses is going to come back at a point in the future. And this, of course, we know to be a dispensationalism. And I don't want to put anybody down. If anybody here is a dispensationalist, I don't, that's fine. But law of Moses is coming back. And so I'm thinking to myself, what's going on here? And I was thinking the other day about the parentheses, where everybody says, the church is the parentheses. And I'm saying, no, Israel was the parenthesis. Israel was the parenthesis, because you have salvation being promised in the Garden of Eden, and you have the Table of Nations. You have, as Nathan pointed out, you have the Tower of Babel, the dispersion of the nations. Then you have the call of Abraham. You have Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, all the way down the line. You have David, you have, the prophets. And then at the end, you get Jesus Christ, and then he opens it up to all the nations again. So, yeah, that's very relevant to this time of year, especially when we're looking at, the resurrection, the death, of course, resurrection and ascension. So, it's one of those things. Well, now that the parenthesis is starting to end, and now it's opening back up to the nations. And I think what people are doing in a lot of cases, people who are dispensational in their belief, and again, no offense to anybody, but I think what they're doing is they're judging by the bulk of content and saying, well, since it was all, most of the Bible is about that nation, then that must be what God's plan is about. And I think the truth of the matter is, well, it's because look who wrote the Bible. They were all Jews. If I was writing a world history, I would be sure to spend probably more chapters on America than on any other country. Of course, you're going to write, from a nationalistic standpoint, and so yeah. But if you really look at the history of the Old Testament, from Genesis all the way on, you do see that it begins. There's a couple thousand years in there, or at least 1,500, where it isn't just about the nation of Israel. It's about the nations, and then of course you have the Noachian covenant and all that, and that's apparently, I believe that's still in effect today. But anyways, I'm not going to be long-winded, but I thought those were some great points, guys. What do you think?
Yeah. So, first of all, I'll say that speaking of kingdoms, I think that's probably the most important thing, or one of the most important things that Jesus did in Holy Week, in the crucifixion, is he inaugurated the kingdom of God. Right. That was what he said at the beginning of his ministry. The kingdom of heaven is at hand. Repent. Right. And so then he has this triumphal entry. He's coming in as the king of the Jews, and the Gentiles mocked him on the cross by putting that by the cross, the king of the Jews. And I think that, I brought up Pentecost earlier. Like I said, I've been thinking about this a little bit. And so I kind of just want to throw something out there that I've been thinking about, because Pentecost is a very interesting feast day, because it is the only feast day in the Old Testament that does not have a set time. Okay. So basically Pentecost, or, the Feast of First Fruits, is basically dependent upon Passover happening first. So there has to be Passover, and then you count 50 days after it was the barley harvest is when Passover was celebrated. And so you have the barley harvest and the wheat harvest. And so there's this season or the first fruits of the barley harvest happens, and that's when Passover takes place. And then you count 50 days, and then you have the first fruits of the wheat. And these were the two major types of grain grown in Israel. And so I think it's interesting that, Jesus dies at the Passover, right? And then also on the Passover, Jesus, or around the time of the Passover, Jesus breaks the bread and feeds the 5,000 with barley loaves, right? So it's all about this barley season. And then there is, this other harvest that comes along, and then Pentecost takes place. And so I think that in the same way that in Israel's history, these are typologically connected to the kingdom of Israel and the Old Testament covenant, I think in the same way, when we have Jesus coming in as being our Passover lamb, and then that waiting period before Pentecost comes, I think that's also going to symbolize his, I guess you could say, his two harvests, so to speak, right? So he's got the harvest of the Jews that came first, that was in the old covenant. And now through Pentecost, through the Holy Spirit, he has this new wheat harvest that he's ripening. And, the New Testament speaks of, the fullness of the Gentiles taking place before Jesus returns, right? So there's, I think, a lot of things going on with the harvest. And so I think when Paul says Jesus was the first fruits, right, I think he's getting at something that, there's this new harvest that's taking place in the same way, Israel would have understood that as we have the barley harvest, and then we've got the wheat harvest. And so, I just kind of wanted to throw that out there to discuss the two harvests, and how Jesus is, I think he's, he was the first fruits, and now he's getting this new harvest going with the inauguration of the kingdom of God. And there's the partial fulfillment, and then the complete fulfillment, and all these different things going on.
Yeah, I don't know. Didn't have too much more to comment on that, except for to think that, Jesus doesn't bring about Pentecost for 43 days or whatever afterwards. So it was reminding you of your time period as well. So I thought that was kind of interesting. That's probably the only thing I could make that connection.
Yeah, and I think what I want to tie that to is the delay between the inauguration of the new covenant and Christ's second return, right? So I think that that's typologically connected to those things. So Jesus has this period between Passover and Pentecost, and then in the first century this actually happened. There's the 40-day period that he's walking the earth and all these things. But I think on top of that, what this shows is we're kind of in that gap, I guess you could say, before he returns, right? The Spirit coming down is a I would say, typologically connected to when he returns and gathers his people. Because again, it's like, I think it's the antitype of the Tower of Babel, right? There, you've got the people being scattered, and then Pentecost is like a gathering, right? And so I think what Pentecost represents is when Jesus comes back. So there's the Feast of First Fruits with the barley, where, you know, they're thanking the Lord after Passover, which is what Jesus was. He's our Passover lamb. And so now what we're in is we're in this 40-day period, so to speak, of time before Pentecost, and he comes and gathers his people. And so I think there's a lot of imagery like that going on. It's like so you could almost think of like the new covenant as like the time period between Passover and Pentecost. And whenever, you know, that trumpet sounds, that'll be the second Pentecost, so to speak, like when he comes and gathers his people.
So I wanted to go into the Garden of Gethsemane. The Garden of Gethsemane had honestly been a big question mark for me in a lot of areas where I felt like a lot was happening, but I didn't really understand why or what was happening. And probably one of the looser connections. So I'm not going to like stick anybody with this one too hard, but one of the ones that I did find profound and interesting was that Jesus, when he's there, he does have all of this emotional trauma, all of the heartache and stress of the entire situation. And it says that he sweats blood and it falls to the ground. And that's what Luke records. And I always kind of wondered, why does Luke mention this? Like, obviously, it's like, okay, well, it's stressful. Okay, I got you. It's stressful. But I thought I was like, is there any further connection? And I actually do think that he is kind of drawing on this idea of Jesus is going to be redeeming the curse on Adam or the curse on the ground in Genesis 3, when it talks about by the sweat of your brow, you will eat bread, right? And so this is this by the sweat of Jesus's brow, his blood falls to the ground. And it's like, that is such a fascinating image that Luke would even think to record. By the sweat of his brow, which ends up being blood, it falls to the ground. And so I feel like this is kind of beginning to show that imagery of Christ redeeming the ground, redeeming mankind by his endurance, by his sweat, by his perseverance, by his perspiration even. And I think that it was the idea that in Genesis, it was to say that all of your efforts as mankind, they will not amount to anything that brings life. But that what we see from Christ is that his work did bring about life. It does bring about healing and restoration, while Adam's work amounts to nothing. It just ends up being futile and empty.
Yeah, I think that's really interesting, and just a random little, I guess, medical fact, because I learned this the other day. I'm listening to The Case for Christ by Lee Strobel on Audible, and there's this one section on like medical stuff, and the sweating of blood is actually a real medical condition that happens when someone is extremely stressed. And the thing about this that to me, it makes it even more grateful for what Christ did for us on the cross is whenever you go through that, when you go through that stress and to the point where you sweat blood, it actually makes your skin very sensitive. And so when he would have been flogged the next day and like beaten, his skin would have been tearing apart more than the average person. So it would have made his suffering that much more extreme. And so it actually, it just makes you more thankful for what Jesus did. I can't imagine like their descriptions and ancient historians where, you know, when they would be beaten like that, and they said you could see their bowels and things like this, you could see their skeletal bones. So like, I just imagine Jesus after sweating blood and then going to the cross with the extra sensitive skin. It just really makes you, you know, more thankful for what he went through for us as well.
And thankful we don't have to go through it. Jesus paid it all. All to him I owe. Yeah. So one of the other ones I wanted to mention, because it kind of begins before the Garden of Gethsemane, but it's the betrayal of Judas, right? The betrayal of Judas. So Judas sells out Jesus for 30 silver pieces, right? Now, the part that blew me away, because I had never heard this before, was that Judas's probably real name to some effect is actually Judah. That basically they would equates to Judah. And so when I go back to Genesis, Judah's the one who has the idea to sell Joseph for 20 pieces of silver. And so when you look at kind of the connection between Joseph and Christ, there are many vast connections. And so when I think of prophecy, this is kind of a typological prophecy that I see where what? Judah sells Joseph over. And what does Joseph first get put into? He gets thrown into a pit, right? Which sort of represents this idea of Christ's death, right? And his brothers do think he's dead. After they sell him into slavery, they're like, he's dead. They forget about him, right? And so the betrayal of Christ at the hands of Judah for pieces of silver is quite profound, I think. And so when you just look at that as like, oh yeah, and Judas is the one coming up over here. And then, there's a whole lot more when you get into the rest of it of, yeah, then Joseph goes over and he basically becomes practically the king of the Gentiles. And then, all of that, there's so many connections there where it talks about Joseph. Joseph becomes, and he sits at the right hand of the Pharaoh. And like, oh, after Christ's ascension, what happens? Well, Christ sits at the right hand of the Father. And I was like, huh, yeah, never thought of that. So let's see.
And
Sizzle
also
says Joseph saved.
I was also going to say
Okay.
with Joseph, right? Like it's kind of like when God created the earth and then he like provided this beautiful place to stay. And then humans, we like stop honoring Yahweh, right? We sin, we fall to the serpent, right? In the same way, when the Jews go to Egypt, what do? They take on their religions. They stop serving God. Like they're provided for in the midst of the famine. And then they, submit to these other gods, and then they're in slavery, and then they need to be freed by Moses and all of that. And then there you got Moses, the one sent by Yahweh to go and free his people, right? Same thing with Jesus. And then, Joshua's name is Yeshua in the Hebrew. So then it's Yeshua that gets them into the promised land, right? So all of these typological connections. And I even think about Jonah, because that's one that Jesus explicitly says, this is a sign you're going to get, during this is the only sign you're going to get is the sign of Jonah. And just like that, the Son of Man is going to be in the earth for 3 days. So when I read the Old Testament, I look for Jesus in all the stories. And so with Joseph, I definitely see a connection with our propensity to fall into the hands of Satan and to the hands of sin, and how we need that person to be sent by Yahweh. We need our Moses, right? We need our Jesus to come and save us and to free the people of God from the hands of Satan and from the hands of wickedness. So these are all the things that I think are really cool that Jesus fulfilled, because that's why when Jesus tells the Pharisees, like, the scriptures testify about me, you're looking in them that you might have life, but they're talking about me the whole time. You just aren't seeing it, and you guys should know that it's me, right? And I don't know. I think that if you're reading the Old Testament and you're not seeing Jesus on basically every page, you're reading it wrong. So
I think you're going to make a bad dispensationalist, Nathan. They're not going to appreciate you much for that. But in the meantime, in the live chat, we got some shout outs to you guys. You guys have your fans out there. They're shouting you out, Brian.
Yeah, Steve is one of the great guys that I've had on my channel. And I think he's got probably the best attitude of anybody that I've probably ever had on my channel. And he's a full preterist, but he'll talk to you. That's what I like about him. But yeah, Steve, I'm going to start doing some shows soon. If you want, you can come on, or these guys or whatever. But I haven't been doing too much because of the time. It's like real. I've been up since 5 o'clock in the morning, so it's like when I get to about this time, I have a hard time, giving these intelligible tidbits of wisdom and knowledge. But hopefully, we can do that soon. But I miss you too, brother.
Yeah.
I'm the
Shout out to
opposite.
all you guys in the chat.
I work
Yeah,
night
yeah.
shift, so
Oh, you work the
I,
night shift. Oh man, I
yeah,
used to
so
work the night shift years ago, and I remember I always had trouble. I could never get, my circadian rhythm or whatever you call it. I could never, I always felt like I was a fish out of water.
really, I actually enjoy it. Like I'm going to work in about, I'll have to leave my house in about an hour, so I'll probably have to head out of here in about 20, 30 minutes. But yeah, I work till about 6 a.m. And then the thing I like about it is I sleep as long as I want, so I feel rested. So
yeah. Hey, I didn't mean to. I didn't know. You're not a dispensationalist, are you, Nathan? Or are you?
No, I'm not. No.
Oh, okay. I didn't want to hurt. I didn't mean to hurt anybody's feelings. I was assuming you guys were mill, so I was like, okay, I'm with the mill because I'm pre-mill, but I'm historic pre-mill. So
yeah,
it's different. It's there's a lot of similarities, but I didn't want to, offend anybody by saying dispensational this or dispensational that. But anyways, yeah.
That's how we know. That's how we know how strong God is that he can save even a historic pre-mill guy like you.
That's right.
No,
yeah, I am Amil. I don't study eschatology that much, but I lean Amil. Haven't looked into it a whole lot. It's just one of those topics where I'm like, when it happens, it happens. Maybe that's a bad attitude, but I kind of look at it as one of those things like I have no idea what's going to happen at the end, but when Christ comes, he comes, and I'm ready for that day. I always talk about the parable of the 10 virgins. I don't want to be one of the unwise ones that isn't ready. So
yeah. Well, Adam and I, we debated on premillennialism. Was it right before Christmas, wasn't it? That was a good debate. I tell you, I told Donnie, I said, I said, man, this guy, he knows what he's doing. Because the other ones that I did were like, man, I felt like I smoked them. But no, I'm just kidding. No, but you did good.
You did, Brian. I watched some of your debates. You did pretty well.
We missed the last 10 minutes, though. Last 10 minutes, the show shut down, so we didn't get the handshakes or anything like that. But yeah, I mean,
I knew I recognized you from somewhere. I knew I recognized you. That's what it was from. I watched that debate. Okay, now I remember you. Okay, yeah, that was a good debate. I enjoyed that.
Thank you.
Yeah. So all right. So I'm going to throw an Adam question in here because this was one of the ones that I thought was really interesting. All right. So you remember when Jesus is in the Garden of Gethsemane, and then there's this moment where the thugs show up, right? And they want to know, hey, like, which one of you is Jesus, right? And Jesus at one point says, I am he. And it says everybody falls back, right?
Mm-hmm.
There's this moment where everyone falls back. Why? Why does that happen? Anyone want to take a shot just for fun? No.
I'm sure you have some Old Testament connection. I know how you think. You found something in the Old Testament that relates to that. That also sounds when Paul is converted on the road to Damascus, the people that are with Paul, they fall over too. So I'm sure there's some sort of theophany in the Old Testament where that happens or something, but you'll have to let me know.
It's a tough one. I don't know. I never thought of it before. I would imagine, though. I mean, I don't even want to venture.
Yeah, I'm not really sure either.
All right, so I'm going to give you an answer. It's going to be a little bit speculative, but it's the best one I can come up with. Because it's just puzzled me because it seemed significant. It seems significant because it's like Jesus just says, I am he, and everybody falls back. And I'm kind of like, what is going on? Like, it just seems so random to me. And I like what Michael Heiser said. He says, like, most of the time when something weird happens, it's important. The writer's not including it just to, hey guys, guess what? Um, this is my speculation. Now, this part is pure speculation, but I'm going to provide some biblical reference. Sort of. My speculation is that the only way that I could think of it is that I wonder if almost the angels present pushed everyone down as though, like, you should bow in reverence. You guys should recognize what's here, what's going on. Now, I'm not going to say that in and of itself is going to be perfectly sufficient, but I did decide to go and look up. It's like, well, what could be the Old Testament references? And it stems from Isaiah 40, right? So listen to these. Isaiah 41:4. Who has performed and done this, calling the generations from the beginning? I, the Lord, the first and the last, I am he. Isaiah 43:10. You are my witnesses, declares the Lord, and my servant whom I have chosen, that you may know and believe me and understand that I am he. Before me was no God formed, nor shall there be any after me. Isaiah 43:13. Henceforth, I am he. There is none who can deliver from my hand. I work, and who can turn it back? Isaiah 46:4. Even to your old age, I am he. And to the gray hairs, I will carry you. I have made, and I will bear, and I will carry, and I will save. And Isaiah 48:12. Listen to me, O Jacob and Israel, whom I called. I am he. I am the first, and I am the last. To me, these are very strong verses where God is asserting, like, worship me. I'm God. I am the important one. I am the significant one. And Jesus is standing here making that type of declaration. I am he. I am the first and the last. Right? He is making a very powerful declaration of who he is and who he stands to be. He is the one who saves. He is the one who delivers. He is the one everyone should be looking to. So that's my 2 cents on that one for the moment.
I like it.
And I kind of think that's what everybody, I think that's what Israelites would be hearing when they hear Jesus say, I am he. They would be hearing these ideas from Isaiah 40, the 4Ds, because it spans some. And yeah.
Yeah, there's a lot of wordplay and things like that going on in the Bible that it's kind of hard to know it in English. For example, like I said, I've been thinking a little bit about the Tower of Babel and the Hebrew word for, like name, when they say, let's make a name for ourselves and things like this. It's very similar to the Hebrew word for obey and honor and listen. All these words are very similar in Hebrew. And so in that story, there's like this play on words of like, those who are prideful, they don't listen to God. They don't listen to Yahweh. They don't submit to Yahweh. And so that's kind of these play on words that you would only know if you heard it in Hebrew and you're like, okay. There's these play on words that are going on, but to the English listener, they don't really pick up on those things. And same thing with, I read a book called The Surprising Genius of Jesus. And he was breaking down specifically the parable of the prodigal son, or as I like to call it, the parable of the two sons, because I think that the older brother is an important part of it too. But anyways, he was breaking down how the parable is so genius because it specifically says his audience before the parable. So it explicitly says that he's speaking to tax collectors and sinners, and he's also speaking to scribes and Pharisees. So there are people who are sinners and are not experts in the law and don't really know the Torah that well. And then there are the experts. And so the parable of the prodigal son has like two simultaneous messages going on at the same time, where the tax collectors and the sinners, they are hearing one story about redemption and and healing and all these different things. And the Pharisees and the scribes are hearing a condemnation of themselves. And he's doing it through even phrases from the Torah. So like he'll say a phrase in a specific part of the parable that should call back to memory a moment in the Torah that was negative. So like they would hear that phrase and they would immediately think of, like for example, maybe Jacob tricking his father, right, for the birthright or something like this, right? That they would hear something that would relate to that, and they would hear the condemnation as the story's being told. But again, to someone who didn't know the Torah, they would just be hearing a cool story about a son being forgiven and all these things, and an older brother who's kind of a jerk. And it's obviously a very powerful story, but at the same time, you've got the Pharisees being given a condemnation based on like these little phrases Jesus was using. And so all that to say, a lot of that's going on. The wordplay, it's so I agree with you. I think when they heard I am he, they were probably, it's the same idea. They were hearing something they had heard a lot and they were like, whoa, he just said I am he. Like, same thing with when Jesus walks on the water in the Gospel of Mark. He basically says I am. There's the great I am statement in John 8, before Abraham was, ego eimi, right? Same thing in Mark. Whenever he walks on the water, he says, don't be afraid, ego eimi. That's exactly what he says when he's walking on the water. Don't be afraid, I am. And so I think he was letting them know who he was.
Did you have any other particular ones you fancied the most, Kairos, Steve?
Another one I like. This is more to do with basically his death, resurrection, and ascension. I don't know if you want to go over that or not, but is that all right?
Yeah, let's let me do one for kind of the right before we get to that, and then let's do that one, just because my ADD will kick in, or obsessive compulsiveness will kick in. Is like, all right, I don't want to go back too much, but just the whole idea, his whole beaten, mockery, all that stuff. Yeah, that's just well into Psalm 22. And it's like, oh yeah, and then they gamble for my clothes. And actually, let me read like a portion of that, just because it's, to me, Psalm 22, several of these passages they're so powerful because they're so poignant. And I love, like, lots of other guys have done the things where they're like, hey, like they'll read a passage and be like, hey, where do you think that's from? And they're like, oh, that's like somewhere in the New Testament. It's like, no, that's the Old Testament. But you have the whole first part, which we'll get to a little bit later. My God, why have you forsaken me? And that's what everyone remembers, right? But for some reason, most people don't remember that that's the beginning. But then he says, I am a worm and not a man. And I actually feel like that's partially goes to what Nathan was describing. The fact that Christ was so ridiculously beaten, marred, scarred, flesh hanging off his bones. A reproach of men, despised.
Also, I was going to say,
despised by the people.
You should, Mike Winger has a video on Psalm 22.
Yep.
The word for worm there is specifically referring to something called a Kermes worm, Kermes. You should look into those. It is unbelievable how much those things look like Jesus. Like the way that they stick to a tree. Blood. They stick to a tree. They look like blood. Oh, it's so cool. It's so cool. Like so that word is very specific. It looks just like the crucifixion. So anyways, I just had to throw that out there. That word for worm is very specific.
But yeah, all who see me mock me. They smack their lips and wag their head, saying, commit yourself to Yahweh. Let him rescue him. Let him deliver him, because he delights in him. Yet you are he who brought me out of the womb. You made me and trust me in my mother's breasts, right? And so he's kind of going into his trust of God and all this. And now we're not going to go into all the Bashan stuff, but there's a whole bunch of really cool stuff if you connect this idea when he says here, many bulls have surrounded me, strong bulls of Bashan have encircled me. This is kind of like a known idea of like the bad guys. The bad guys have surrounded me, and they're the ones who, yeah, encircle me. They open wide their mouths at me as a lion that tears and roars. And even just think about that, right? The lion who tears and roars, and as his whole body is being shredded, and then he's poured out like water. All his bones are out of joint. My heart is like wax. It melts within me. My strength is dried up like a pot shared, and my tongue cleaves to my jaws, and you lay me in the dust of death. For the dogs have surrounded me, and a band of evildoers have encompassed me. They pierced my hands and my feet. I count all my bones. They look, they stare at me. They divide my garments among them, and for my clothing they cast lots. It's really difficult for me to read that and not think about Jesus. And even many other people that are not big religious goers, they even read that, hear that, and say, yeah, I heard of that story. I've heard of that story. So anyway, you can go on, Steve.
All right. Well, I'm going to just go 2 chapters back from what you're reading, or 2 chapters ahead at Psalm 24. And I believe what's being described here is Jesus's ascension, and then his descension. And and I believe it's what Paul refers to in Ephesians 4:8-9. What does it mean that he ascended, and unless he first descended? And like this psalm is so powerful because not only is it prophetic, but it's also telling you exactly who Jesus is. He is Yahweh. He's the Lord of hosts. He's the King of glory. So this is Psalm 24. It's I'll just read the whole psalm because it's like yeah, that's good. Yeah, it's only 10 verses. The earth is the Lord's, and the fullness thereof, the world and these who dwell therein. For he has founded it upon the seas and established it upon the rivers. Who shall ascend the hill of the Lord, and who shall stand in his holy place? He who has clean hands and a pure heart, who does not lift up his soul to what is false, and does not swear deceitfully. He will receive blessing from the Lord, and righteousness from the God of his salvation. Now, the only one in the flesh to have ever fit that description is Jesus Christ. No man has ever fit that description, other than Jesus Christ, no one else but him. And then it says, such is the generation of those who seek him, who seek the face of the God of Jacob. And so those of us who are in Christ, we're counted to be, ascended with him. We were formerly dead in our trespasses, but we have been made alive and seated with him in heavenly places. And then, so that was his ascension. But first, lift up your heads, O gates, and be lifted up, O ancient doors, that the King of glory may come in. Who is the King of glory? The Lord strong and mighty, the Lord mighty in battle. Lift up your heads, O gates, and lift them up, O ancient doors, that the King of glory may come in. Who is the King of glory? The Lord of hosts. He is the King of glory. And yeah, I just think that's just so amazing because it, Job 38:17, it describes the shadow of death as having gates and doors, and it being the realm of the dead. And so here we have a prophecy of God himself descending to the realm of the dead, and it's in the context of a verse that also of this man supposedly that's has all these that's basically infallible, has a pure heart, and does not swear deceitfully, clean hands and pure heart, so yeah, we
It's the
have
gates of Hades, right?
yeah, And so only Jesus could fulfill that. And again, like this was written about 1,000 years before Jesus, just like Psalm 22. It's just really, really amazing. I just love it.
Yeah, that one's a good one. That one's a good one. Actually, let me kick in the Job 19 because it just reminds me of kind of in this vein anyway, in this spot. Kind of fits in there and stuff. This is one of the ones that, of course, I love, and many people know the main portion, but Job chapter 19, and Job is talking, and he's not having a really good day or anything like that, but he says, right, as for me, I know that my Redeemer lives, and at the last he will rise up over the dust of the world. Now, there's a bunch of different translations. You can even see it's kind of in italics here, but the translation that I prefer, I need to find an official translation. Somebody has it, but that what it actually says is, as for me, I know that my Redeemer lives, and that in the end he will stand on the grave. And even after my skin is destroyed, yet from my flesh I shall behold God. And so it's a declaration that his Redeemer lives, and he knows this because he will, in the end, conquer death. He will be victorious over the grave. And that even after Job, he is destroyed, yet he knows from his flesh he will see God. And so that's the promise that, hey, because my Redeemer will overcome death, I know that I will also be resurrected. And that's the big promise from Paul, right? Is that we shall be resurrected. And there's a really good one. It's Isaiah 53, and even actually. Were you and I talking about that, Steve?
Yeah.
But that there's a variation of the Dead Sea Scrolls?
I don't know. I'm not sure.
Anyway, so there's one part in there that's really cool that I don't know if I have it offhand. It might take me a second to find it. But in essence, it talks about the death of the suffering servant in Isaiah 53, right? But in the Dead Sea Scrolls, it says, and he will see the light, which is speaking of his resurrection, that he will reclaim life in there. And so it's the idea that, yeah, the suffering servant will die, he will perish, but he will rise again. And that's exactly what Job is getting at here as well. I didn't know if you had more to go off on that one, Steve.
Well, I think this kind of speaks to how prophecy works in the Bible. Like when I was reading what you read and what I read in Psalm 24 and what you read in Psalm 22, like an ancient Israelite, like someone who would have read those things, I don't think they would have been like, oh, this is talking about, God is going to come in the flesh or anything like that. I don't, it would have been mysterious. And I believe this is obviously intentional. I don't think God did it on accident. And so it sets this idea that God wanted to demonstrate that his word is true, that prophecy is true, prophecy is real, but he was also limited to what he could say because if the Old Testament just flat out said God is going to come into the flesh and he's going to at 30 years old he's going to begin a ministry, and then 3 years later he's going to die on the cross, and then after 3 days he's going to resurrect, and then 40 days later he's going to ascend to heaven. Like that, if that was written in the Old Testament like exactly as that would be amazing, absolutely amazing. But God couldn't do that simply because if he did, Satan would have known the plan. And so essentially what you have in the Old Testament is God revealing his plan to people, but in a way that Satan can't understand what exactly is being said to the extent where he could thwart it. And I really like the way that Michael Heiser explained Jesus' temptation, and it seemed like what Satan was really trying to do there, he was like fishing for information. Like he was just trying to figure out, can I kill this guy? Because he knew, because Genesis 3:15, that God was going to send someone to essentially kill him, to destroy him. And so, Satan, he has to figure out, well, if God is going to send someone to kill me, then I need to figure out a way to kill whoever he sends before that person kills me. And I think that's exactly what Satan was trying to do in the temptation in the desert. He was trying to figure out, how can he thwart God's plan? That was essentially the goal there. But unbeknownst to him, that his intention to thwart God's plan was the plan.
Yeah. Well, you know what's funny? I really just love, it's just that old quote, right? What Satan meant for evil, God meant for good. And that
Yep.
was actually that's actually a quote from Joseph.
Mhm.
He's the one who says it. And I think that, again, just fitting in exactly with all of our typology, right? God used the death of Joseph, him being sold into slavery, him being mistreated, to save the people, and ultimately even to save his own brothers, right? It was
Yep.
and tremendously powerful instance where, yeah, God does exactly that. And if we're talking about Joseph being a type of Christ, there you go. It's the same thing. What Satan meant for evil, God meant for good.
Yeah.
I was going to say as well, I think something that Joseph embodies well is the motif of the suffering servant that we see in Isaiah 53. But also just the idea that, and this was kind of growing in Second Temple Judaism, just the idea of the suffering servant, especially Isaiah and, Zechariah as well. Zechariah 12 says, if you look in verse 10, I'll pour out on the kingship of David and the population of Jerusalem a spirit of grace and supplication, so that they will look on me, the one who they have pierced. They will lament for him as one laments for an only son, and there will be a bitter cry for him, like the bitter cry for a firstborn. So Zechariah is talking about here how Jesus would be rejected by his own people, and his own people would pierce him, and his own people would crucify him. And then we see this idea in Isaiah 53, but also in Daniel chapter 9, which this, by the way, is my favorite prophecy of Jesus. It says, if you look in verses 25 and 26, it says, so no one understand from the issuing of the command to restore and rebuild Jerusalem until an anointed one, a prince, arrives. There will be a period of 7 weeks and 62 weeks. It will again be built with a plaza and moat, but in distressful times. So basically he's saying, and this is before the second temple was built, there's going to be a decree to rebuild the second temple. Now when we read the next verse, it says this: now after the 62 weeks, an anointed one will be cut off and have nothing. So the anointed one here is referring to the Messiah. He'll be cut off and have nothing. As for the city and the sanctuary, the people of the coming prince will destroy them, but his end will come speedily like a flood. Until the end of the war that has been decreed, there will be destruction. He will confirm a covenant with many for 1 week, but in the middle of that week, he will bring sacrifices and offerings to a halt. On the wing of abominations will come one who destroys, until the decreed end is poured out on the one who destroys. So the idea here is that the second temple would be built, then the anointed one would come, the Messiah, and then he would be killed. He'd be cut off. It says he will be cut off and have nothing. And that word cut off specifically refers to like a violent death. And then the second temple would be destroyed. And this was prophesied in Daniel chapter 9 before Jesus came, obviously. So this is a prophecy I love to, ask my Jewish friends, like, hey, the Old Testament prophesies that the second temple would be destroyed after the Messiah came. And so you can kind of ask them, like, who was the Messiah that came before the second temple was destroyed? And that's always an interesting conversation. But and then obviously there's the reference to the new covenant that came in after that. And then, yeah, there will be the, I guess, end, as it says, the decreed end is poured out on the one who destroys, so on Satan. So yeah, to me, this idea of the suffering servant is one that I think also kind of perplexed Jewish people coming into the time of Jesus, because they were kind of trying to understand, like, it seems like the Messiah is going to be this king-like figure like David, but Isaiah is saying he's going to be a suffering servant. Like, what's going on here? There's like this. There are some interesting passages in the Talmud and things like that, and early Jewish writings where they're kind of wrestling with these contrasting motifs. And obviously Jesus was the suffering servant, but he also triumphed through the resurrection, and he inaugurated this new kingdom that is being spread all over the world. And so they kind of just misunderstood this contrasting motif and expected him to just like overthrow Rome. And when that didn't happen, that's why they rejected him. So I think this is another really important piece that Jesus fulfilled, is the idea of the suffering servant. He came to suffer, not just to come and like conquer a earthly kingdom and fight in wars and things like this. He came to suffer and to do that for us on our behalf as our representative. And it's a wonderful thing to think about.
What do you think, Brian? Are we crazy?
No, not crazy. But yeah, I mean, I think you guys have brought out some great points, and I really think that there was a point that one of you guys made just about 10 minutes ago, and I forget which one, but it was dang, I forgot what it was. See, that's a problem when you've been up for 15 hours looking at data and stats and figures all day and juggling numbers and sending out reports, and oh man, it gets crazy. But yeah, I think these are some great prophecies, and I think, I mean, we've really covered like, I mean, I have to go pretty soon, but just in an hour and 15 minutes, we've just covered so much ground. And I like what you said, Adam, about the two witnesses and the two olive trees, and the suffering servant. This is something that I think when we're celebrating Easter, or when we're celebrating Good Friday, because some people don't celebrate Good Friday, and I mean, I'm not superstitious or anything like that, so I don't necessarily, I celebrate Good Friday every day. I mean, basically, I celebrate the cross every day. I don't have to do it one day a year. But there are some people that don't celebrate Good Friday. But everybody who celebrates Good Friday is forced, and perhaps that's the wrong word to use, but is going to think of the cross, is going to think of what happened on Calvary. And with the instance of Judas selling Christ for 30 pieces of silver, that is, I think, Joseph, and I think that is a very good analogy. And we have to remember, Judah, they were the ones that were dispersed in AD 70. So, there you go with AD 70 again. And I'm sort of what you would call a partial preterist. So I agree that AD 70 was important, but Judah was the one that rejected him in the first century. And then Judah ends up getting dispersed. So I always take that back to Cain and Abel. Abel, I always do this. Cain murders his brother, and then he's evicted from the land. And that, to me, that's, everything is pointing towards Christ. So even like the garden, everything, like Adam, what you said with the drops of blood, everything's pointing to Christ. But this has been really a lot of food for thought here, gentlemen. I do actually have to go and get some shut-eye, but I hope to do this again soon. It's been a great discussion, and you guys are really intelligent. I look forward to interacting with you some more.
Yeah,
Thanks,
nice
Brian. It's
meeting
been really
you.
great to have you, man.
All right,
Thanks for coming, man.
Hey, nice meeting you guys. Happy Easter, everyone.
Happy Easter.
Happy Easter.
All right, peace out.
See ya. All right, let's see here. I like this little comment here by the Steve Sizzle. Yep, just talking about Samuel 8:7. For they have not rejected you, but they have rejected me from being king over them. And yeah, I just think, man, that's so powerful. And I think, honestly, some pastors could use that today. Where sometimes they feel like, man, things just aren't going well. And even for the pastors that aren't prosperity pastors, sometimes I feel like they still don't believe that in their hearts, because like they they're still judging their own ministry by how successful they are.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and they're still just looking as like, dude, I don't have like all of these people coming in, and there's not salvation, and there's not all this good stuff, and they think it's my fault. Sometimes it's not your fault.
Mm-hmm. And we don't want to be like the people at the Tower of Babel trying to build our own empire. You know, we want to build his kingdom and not worry about those things so much. What is that?
I think something has happened to your background, Steve. Your background is broken. It's separated. We could have, or just Steve's background, or Steve.
Welcome, Steve's background.
We feel very welcome though in Steve's background.
That's true. I probably have to get going too. I have to be at work in like 40 minutes, so I need to go pack a lunch and get ready for my shift. So, boys, it's been a pleasure hanging out with you. Thanks for having me, Adam. And
yeah, man.
You know, Steve and I, we got a debate coming up next month, so be looking forward to that.
Yeah, that should be good.
Yeah. But,
May
hope
May
you guys
12th.
have a good. Yeah, May 12th. Yep, it's going to be fun. So, yeah, we'll keep in touch, Steve, and keep preparing for that. But Adam, thanks for having me, man. Appreciate you guys. Hope you all have a good night, and we'll talk soon.
All right, have a good one, Nate.
See you later, Nathan. So I've still got a few more if you're good to hang out, Steve.
Sure.
So let's see, where were we at? Did you have any other one in particular at the moment? We just keep on plugging away. I mean, I like the Ascension one big time. Actually, let's touch on the Ascension one, right?
Okay.
Let's clue into Ephesians 4.
Okay.
Right?
Yeah.
So, because you're talking about like in Psalm 24 is a really, really awesome connection regarding, right, the ascension of Jesus Christ, who this is, and how what he has to first descend before he ascends to the highest place. And it's exactly the idea that Christ, he descends and sort of conquers death through his purity, righteousness, holiness, and then he ascends to the right hand, the position of power.
Yeah.
Right. And this was pretty much the story of Joseph, right? Where he was in prison. You don't really get any lower than prison without dying. He was thought to be dead before he ascended to the right hand. And this was what was going on with Christ. But Paul, he exactly makes this connection. He's like, oh yeah, what does it mean that he ascended, except for that he also descended to the lowest parts? But then he says, and he took captivity captive, and he gave gifts to men. Right?
Yeah.
And then right after that, he says, and then he gave some to be apostles, some to be prophets, some to be teachers, some to be evangelists, all that stuff. And I've really thought that what he's referring to is he's kind of referring to the taking, the looting of the forces of darkness and giving the authorities and powers of them to us, to his people.
Yeah. Yeah. Isaiah 53 says the spoils. So those are the spoils of it. And that's a thing that you do when you conquer. And so, you know, as Michael Heiser points out in Unseen Realm, Ephesians 4:8 isn't about liberating prisoners. It's about conquering enemies. And when you conquer it's when you conquer enemies that there's spoils. There aren't spoils from, freeing captives,
setting people free.
Yeah.
Because the captives don't have anything.
Yeah.
Like the good captives.
Yeah. Yeah. It's conquering language. And so, unfortunately, a lot of people interpret Ephesians 4:8 as the harrowing of Hades.
And
they get that because without Ephesians 4:8, you don't have the harrowing of Hades. You take away that one verse, and you lose all credibility for the idea that Jesus took or rescued people from Hades up to heaven. So without that one verse, you don't have it. And so, they kind of have to cling to that verse in order to maintain that doctrine.
Mhm. Yeah.
Yeah, it totally goes
So
against
I
the
really,
concept.
oh my gosh, yeah. Well, that goes against all the Catholics, and I think the Orthodox as well. Like they're really, really big into the harrowing of Hades on
Yeah,
both levels. Most
yeah,
Christians are too,
yeah.
but
Yeah,
they're
most
not
Christians,
committed to it
like,
the
they
same way.
haven't even heard of the harrowing of Hades, I think. Um, I think, at least when as I was growing up, like, I never even knew of Hades or Sheol or like in any kind of destination after death other than heaven or hell. And so my view growing up was all throughout from Genesis to Revelation, whenever anybody died, they either went to heaven or hell. And I think that's what most Christians believe, is that, they think that just the Bible teaches all throughout that you either go to heaven or hell, and there's no in between. There's nothing. There's nothing other than those two places. But Jesus makes it very clear that no one is thrown into the lake of fire or Gehenna. There, eh, so I don't think I've told you this. Maybe I have, but Jerome, he's the one who is responsible for that confusion with Gehenna and Hades, because he's the one who wrote the Vulgate. And so
Okay.
when he wrote the Vulgate, the Latin Bible, basically, like, he he translated Gehenna and Hades as the same word. I can't remember what it is in Latin, but so he instead of maintaining that distinction that Jesus had, that Jesus made, he eliminated that distinction. And then um, William Tyndale, he used the Latin Vulgate when he made his translation into English, and so, like, he also didn't maintain that distinction. And I think, uh, I don't know the history of his beliefs, but he did believe in soul sleep at the point, at the time that he translated the Bible into English. And and like, he said something along the lines of, the souls, when they die, they don't go to heaven, they don't go to hell, and those who say that they do, blaspheme God, because Jesus said, there's no other place that the soul can go, and that's either heaven or hell, and they don't receive that till after death. And so, because that and in my book, like, I made it kind of seem like he's the one who started that, and it was based off of his doctrine of soul sleep. So that's a correction in my book. Like, I think that maybe he already had the doctrine of soul sleep, and if he wasn't trying to change the text to make it fit, I think he had the doctrine of soul sleep simply because he was reading the Vulgate and he was trying to make sense out of it. Well, if there's if no one goes anywhere, if the soul doesn't go anywhere other than heaven or hell, and we don't go to heaven or hell until after Judgment Day, well, then that means we don't go to heaven or hell after we die. And so, like, he was just I think he was just simply trying to make sense of the text as it was presented to him. And and yeah, like, I think it was just an honest mistake. But it just he used that for the we don't refute a false doctrine with another false doctrine. And
Yeah.
not maintaining that distinction of Hades and Gehenna, that's what created the confusion. And I believe that confusion still exists today, because even in the Westminster Confession of Faith, they claim, in contrast to what William Tyndale claimed, they claim there's no other place that a person goes when they die other than heaven or hell, and that's why they're there now. And so, so they're using the exact same rhetoric, because that's what it is. They're using the exact same rhetoric to prove their point, but but they're basing it off of the idea that Hades and Gehenna are the same thing.
Right, right. Yeah. Yeah, and that's definitely yeah. So Steve has written an entire book about the intermediate state and what happens when you die. And so talking a bunch about those things, which are really Yeah, great topics. I've done some work on that as well. And yeah. And actually that's what your guys' debate is going to be about is are the dead conscious or unconscious in the intermediate state? That'll be on May 12th. It'll be Curious Kairos and Nathan Bozeman versus Chris Date and
James Harding.
James, I think. Yeah, James. I was like, oh, I can't remember his last name. So yeah. Now, I really want to get to, of course, one of my favorite prophecies for the cross of Christ. And that, of course, is Genesis 3:15, right? Genesis 3:15. Now, of course, this is where I've spent most of, well, actually, in a funny sense, I actually haven't spent that much time on Genesis 3:15. I spent all my time on the rest of the verses around it. But you kind of have to get at 3:15 a little bit. And this is, to me, one of the cornerstone verses, really one of the most essential, crucial verses. So Genesis 3:15, right, where God says to the serpent in the garden, I'll put enmity between you and the woman, between your seed and her seed. He shall bruise your head and you shall bruise his heel. Okay, so what this is talking about is it's talking about Satan. And then the woman, yes, she is Eve in this moment, but she ends up kind of going through and representing God's people. And then ultimately, especially representing God's people, of course, are the seed of God's people. And so then there's the seed of Satan and the seed of the woman, which are God's children. And so you have the children of the devil and God's children. And then you have, right, this anointed special seed who is going to bruise the head of the serpent, right? So he's going to defeat the serpent, but the serpent is also going to bruise him on the heel. Now, most people have thought that this means, well, it's going to be total victory for the Messiah and like complete loss for the serpent. But I think John Walton is correct to point out, number one, the word is the same in both cases. He will bruise you on the head and he will bruise you on the heel. It's the same Hebrew word. Even though I'm curious what this is bringing up this note. Yeah, they're just bringing up crush, but it's the same Hebrew word in both cases. And so what this really implies is actually they're both going to kind of cause their mutual destruction. They're both going to kind of kill each other in a sense. And so some people are like, well, but he's only biting him on the heel. But if you think about a snake that's poisonous, this would be fatal. You know, and I was actually on a trek with a bunch of other people, and they were talking about how a cow got bit by a snake, like during the same day. And I was like, oh, well, like, what happened to it? And they're like, he's dead. What would you expect? Of course, he's he's dead, right? Because the snakes are poisonous. And this is exactly kind of the idea. Now, this is extremely powerful and relevant when you look at the rest of these other messianic verses in this context. So, in other words, it's the idea that Satan is going to be the one to strike the Messiah. And so, when I see Jesus on the cross and I see what? His hands and his feet are pierced, just as we read in Psalm 22. It's the idea of almost what? A serpent's fangs that are going into him. And of course, what else? The seed of the serpent surrounding him. Remember when we went to Zechariah 12:10, right? And it says, you will look upon him whom you have pierced. So who's it talking about? It's talking about the Jewish people, right?
Yeah.
And then they're the ones who are striking the Messiah. And then you look at that and you combine that with John 8:44, when Jesus says, you're not children of Abraham. You're children of your father, the devil. Right? So when I look at Jesus on the cross and he's surrounded by everybody else, it's as if he is surrounded by the seeds of the serpent. They're all children of the devil. They're striking at the Messiah. Right? Now, the really cool part as well is that then I connect Genesis 3:16, Now I know for most people, they're not going to know this right away, but Genesis 3:16 is the hope and glory and the center of this chiasm in Genesis 3. So he to the woman he said, "I'll greatly multiply your pain and conception." And what it's really referring to is it's referring to emotional pain. It's referring to emotional pain. And it's like, well, okay, but isn't God the one who institutes this pain? Because he says, I will greatly multiply your pain. It's exactly the same construction as what we just saw in 3:15, where God says, I will put enmity between you and the woman and between your seed and her seed. And so the pain of the woman is actually the enmity between her seed and the seed of the serpent, because the seed of the serpent will seek to kill the seed of the woman. And this is what's going to cause her tremendous sorrow. And that's exactly what we see in the New Testament. And Simeon even prophesies this to Mary, right? He says, hey, like, behold, like he's going to kind of turn. He's going to turn the Israelites against each other. He's going to bring much light. But he also says that, and he will bring great sorrow to you, basically, or great pain, as if it was a sword to your very soul. And so when Mary is there as the actual fulfillment of the woman who has given birth to the promised seed, right? And she is doing what? She is watching her own son die at the hands of the serpent and his children. And of course, Mary is utterly heartbroken. Like I can't really imagine, to be honest. Cannot imagine. And so that's what's going on. And that's exactly what Jesus prophesied as well. When Jesus came, he said, I have not come to bring peace, but a sword. I've come to put father against son, mother against daughter, husband against wife, right? He came to do what? Divide, to make a clean separation. There's the children of the serpent and there's the children of the woman. And so then ultimately, it's like, okay, if they both destroy each other, if the seeds of the serpent are going to kill the Messiah, then how do we know we have victory? And that's where the end of it is. But your desire will be for your man, for the promised Messiah, and he will rule over you. So he will have victory. He will be the one to rule over you. And he only does that after his death, burial, and resurrection on the cross.
It's good stuff.
Yeah. So I think that the great verses that to me fit exactly with this, when you're looking at like, well, who kills the Messiah? It's Satan, right? Right here. Who are we seeing? It's the serpent and the children of the serpent. You go to Psalm 22. Oh, the bulls of Bashan surround him, right? And they what? They have pierced his hands and his feet. Oh man. The bulls of Bashan are the children of the serpent. You know, they're like dogs. And then you get to Isaiah 53. And actually, let me pull up Isaiah 53 because that's pretty cool too. Isaiah 53. Surely our griefs he himself bore and our sorrows he carried. Yet we ourselves esteemed him stricken, smitten of God, and afflicted. This is exactly like Job. When Job was afflicted, he was brought about all sorts of terrible things, right? His family's been killed, except for his wife. His stuff has been taken. His property's been destroyed. He's lost everything. And then, of course, his three friends come along and they aren't much help either, right? And what are his friends' conclusion? Oh, well, God has done this to you. God is striking you because of your sin. And Job is like, I'm not guilty. I'm innocent. I'm innocent. But his friends were convinced. You are stricken by God. You are punished by God, right? Uh, Even though all along, the one who was accusing him was Satan. It was Satan who had stricken him. It was Satan who was lashing out at him. Now, God allowed it and he used it, but it was Satan who had done all this stuff. And then it says, right? But he was pierced through for our transgressions, he was crushed for our iniquities. And again, it's like, oh, wow, I see all this pierced image. And every time you see this pierced image, you should think back to Genesis 3:15, the Messiah who is pierced for our transgressions, who is pierced for our iniquities. And yeah, that's what I see there. You have it. Genesis 3:15, Psalm 22, Isaiah 53, and then yeah, you wrap up right there in Zechariah 12:10 with, and they will look on him who has been pierced, who is, pierced through. And that will be our Messiah. What do you say, Steve?
Yeah. Yeah, I like it. Yeah,
Yeah, and just to mention
it's
actually,
truly
because
amazing.
I totally think this is true. One of my other buddies is the first one to mention this to me. But Steve, here, the other Steve Sizzle is completely correct. The viper bites Paul, and no harm, the viper is thrown into the fire, right? You remember in Acts 28, there's this whole story where Paul is in there and he gets bitten by a snake, and everybody's expecting Paul's going to die. Paul's going to die. Any moment, he's going to keel over. But Paul just shakes it off right into the flames, right? And I do think this is entirely very powerful imagery of the Satan getting thrown right back into the flames. And my other
Yeah.
buddy, Andrew, he actually remarks that it's like, why didn't Paul die? And he says, because of Romans 8:1, for there is no condemnation for those of us who are in Christ Jesus. And it's the idea that because Paul was justified, he was righteous, there was no condemnation on him, not because of Paul's own goodness, but because of Christ. And because of all that, he didn't die either. So, yeah, man, shout out to Steve Sizzle. Come hit us up some other time. Have a good night, man. Yeah, we're going to wrap up here in a little bit as well, um, but yeah, I think that's really, really powerful imagery and just an awesome depiction of the cross and what Jesus does there.
Yeah, absolutely.
Hmm. Well, you got any other big parting words for us, Steve? So we get ready to close it down.
Um, Nothing comes to mind right at the moment. I'm sure after we're done, I'll probably think, "Oh man, we should talk about
Well,
this. Should talk about that."
let's end on a riddle. I've got a little riddle for everyone listening. All right, this is a fun one for me. But I really wondered. Remember, there's darkness that fills the land, right? Christ is on the cross, and then all of a sudden there's darkness for 3 hours, right? And of course, I wanted to know why. What does this represent? There has to be something going on here. So all of a sudden, there's just darkness. So, what do you think, Steve? Did I already explain this one? I might have.
Um, I think it could be a revelation of who Jesus is. Like Jesus is the light. As John 1:5 and elsewhere throughout John 1 and John, like Jesus is the light. So if you kill the lights go off, so to speak. I don't know if that's where you're going with it or not.
Um, I don't think it's quite there just yet because he doesn't quite go out yet. That would be
Well,
more
yeah.
interesting, I think, if he. I've heard someone say something like that before. I think that would have been really interesting if when Jesus died, then darkness happened. That would have been like really, really compelling. Um, but I think that this is actually it's a callback to the Exodus because, like we've been talking about, the Passover is the story, right? That's the story that everybody in Israel is going to be talking about. And in the story of the Exodus, there's a plague of darkness, right?
3 days.
And it says that darkness occurred in Egypt for 3 days. And yes, actually, you are also correct. It says there was darkness everywhere except in the homes of the Israelites. They still had light, right? But it occurred for 3 days, which is exactly what 3 hours is what happens here. Now, why does that happen? Because it is foretelling and foreshadowing that what's the next plague?
The wasn't that the destroyer? Or oh,
Yeah,
this okay, yeah, destroyer's next.
is the killing of the firstborn,
Yeah,
right? Then it's the actual Passover.
yeah,
It's the actual Passover. So the first thing that takes place is darkness in the whole land. And then the Passover, where all of Israel needed to do what? Take the lamb's blood and put it over their doorposts so that they would be saved. And you know what? When you look at the cross of Christ, it's really not difficult to see the image of that cross beam looking very similar to the doorposts that Israelites would have had all over Egypt. And Jesus' blood being spread on it represents exactly that idea of the one whom you should believe in and whose blood is over you will save you from death.
yeah. There's
Yeah.
light where the lamb is.
That's right. That's right. That's right. So, yeah, so where the lamb is and who you put your faith and trust in, that's where you can have assurance of salvation and hope and resurrection from the dead. For 3 days later, Jesus was resurrected. And if he wasn't resurrected, all of our hopes are in vain. But praise be to God that he was resurrected and that we can be assured of our hope and salvation in Jesus Christ.
Amen.
But yeah, all right, you guys, we'll be wrapping up this one. If you guys want to see any other things, we'll also be doing a live debate on Monday night. We'll be debating if God is omnipresent or if he is not omnipresent. A little bit of controversy there, but a lot of fun and plenty more content coming up down the road. So hope you guys have a great evening. If you guys want to, of course, support the channel, hey, please like, share, subscribe. And yeah, if you want to bless a squirrel, you can also click to bless a squirrel in the links. And if you actually also would like particular content put out there or have particular questions, then please leave some questions and we'll see if we can get around to it. So until next time.